Hello, and welcome to this episode of This Is Homeschooling. I'm Blair Lee, and today I'll be having a conversation with Kat Hutcheson. Hey, Kat.
Hi, Blair. Thanks for having me on today.
Thanks for being here.
So, I really wanted to come on and have this episode today because you and I keep having these conversations on the phone and when we meet on Zoom about cognitive load. And I know you've been talking at conferences this summer about cognitive load for students and for parents. And I've been going through the new curriculum you're writing, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, but the way you've written it really helps with the cognitive load of the parent facilitating it. And it's just not something that I see a lot of people in the homeschool community talking about, and I really think we should be.
Oh, I agree. Homeschooling is really overwhelming for a lot of people. I think it's like anything else. It's like a new job or a new house or romanticize it a bit, even if you're worried. And then you get into it, and I think what people don't realize is the cognitive load is pretty high, especially when you just get started.
Well, I agree, especially when you're first getting started because you already have all these other things in your life, your job, your parenting, your house, your hobbies or volunteering or whatever your other interests are. And then you're adding on homeschooling. And a lot of people when they get started don't realize that that is a whole other full-time job you have just added to your cognitive load. Not just implementing teaching your children and facilitating that, but figuring out their social calendar and their extracurriculars and deciding what curriculum and resources to use. It's like you really could have three people working this one job and it might not be enough sometimes.
So at conferences, I was really interested to look at, you're standing there speaking to people. I was like, that's really interesting. I think some vendors are here. And so there were there at this conference in Dallas. They were at both Dallas and San Antonio over 2 3 week span. I was in Texas twice. And there were a marriage and family counseling vendor was there, and they half the team came to see me in Dallas and the other half came in San Antonio. And it was just really interesting. And they told me that they had never thought to talk to people about cognitive load. And it's something that marriage and family counselors probably should be talking about. And that actually was really interesting too, because of course, when you're right in the middle of whether you're having a big discussion or whether you're kind of irritated or whatever, that adds to your cognitive load. So I thought it was interesting. But the two people who had the biggest impact on me around this issue, one was you when you came to me and said that the scripting, this is, by the way, the writing program that I've been working on, that the scripting took the cognitive load for teaching writing off your plate and that it had a profound effect on how effective you thought you were being in working through the program with your child. And then there was a parent a in Dallas that up to me, and she wanted to talk more about reducing her cognitive load because she has ADHD and she's homeschooling a child, pretty significant ADHD, according to her. And she has a child who has pretty significant ADHD. And she could see where both of them were getting totally overwhelmed within the course of their studies, and it was causing both to shut down. And I know you have ADHD as well, Kat. Is that something that parents with who are homeschooling with ADHD, who have ADHD probably should be thinking about as far as cognitive load?
Well, I mean, I think everyone should be thinking about cognitive load, but absolutely neurodivergent parents, parents with ADHD, parents who are autistic, the way our brains function, it's constant chaos in my brain. My ADHD is currently unmedicated, Blair, as you know. So it is just wild confetti chaos in my brain all the time. So the littlest added on thing can be the straw that broke the camel's back for me. So anything that reduces my cognitive load helps me to be more successful in implementing curriculum or implementing a routine or work job, stuff being completed or whatever. Anything that reduces my cognitive load is good. Um, I think it's actually one of the most important and most effective things you can do for ADHD is to really pay attention to your cognitive load and manage that and set healthy boundaries that protect your cognitive load. And that's actually something that I am really trying to model for Kinsey right now because her ADHD is pretty severe as well. So not only am I paying more attention to my cognitive load, but I am paying attention to her cognitive load and I'm having conversations with her about it. And I'm verbalizing when I am doing something specifically to reduce my cognitive load or specifically to mitigate things with her cognitive load. I'm talking to her about this is why we're doing this. I want this to be something that she grows up thinking about. So as she becomes more independent and has to start implementing her own routines and has more say in what curriculum she's going to choose or planning her college courses when she's older or work. I want this to be something that just becomes part of her internal monologue.
So, will you share with us how you model when you become overloaded cognitively?
Um I have gotten a lot better about taking time for myself. When I become overwhelmed, overstimulated, overloaded cognitively, and I need to take a step back, I used to really put it off until I was at my breaking point, but now I'm better about paying attention to it, being able to know the signs of when that's coming and verbalizing to my family and people around me, this is what's happening. This is what I need to be in a better place. And I'm going to prioritize me getting that right now.
So, let's talk about the three types of cognitive load. There's intrinsic load, that's how challenging what you're working on is, just inherently challenging, and that's very personal. For example, math does not have a high intrinsic load for me. My son, it's a different story. Extraneous load. This is where this can happen from this is the uh, contributions from outside influence, and it can be the way curriculum is structured, or it can be because it's really messy where you are, and that bothers you and you can't stop thinking about it. And then there's germane load. Germane load is the mental effort that goes into processing. And so the germane load is really why mastery of information um, is important as students are learning, because then the amount of time and effort and energy needed to process that information has a lower germane load. So the intrinsic load. Let's say, let's create a situation, two different situations. One is the intrinsic load is high for you, and the intrinsic load is high for the learner. How would we strategize that, Kat? I have some thoughts, but do you have any thoughts?
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Blair.
Okay, when something is challenging for you and your learner, recognize right away that that is going to have a high intrinsic load. And so go out of your way to find resources that work for actually, or just outsource it. If you can afford to outsource something that has a high intrinsic load for you and your learner, find someone that that the intrinsic load isn't high for them and hope that they will have strategies that will reduce the intrinsic load for your learner. You know, math, I love math as a way to think in terms of cognitive load because I like to say that there's an infinite number of ways to solve any math problem. There really are. Some of them are ridiculous, like 2 plus this minus 3 divided by 5, to get to an answer. It could be ridiculous, but there's really 2 to 3 that make sense. And what you really find when you work with kids in math is that the pathway to solving that equation doesn't the same pathway doesn't make sense equally for the same for different people. And so I like to think of it in terms of that. I might have made that more complicated with that example. I might have increased the extraneous load with that example. But anyway, just recognize that when it comes to learning, it's a process, and make it as break it down as much as you need to make the delivery of the information and the teaching manageable for your learner and yourself. Okay, Kat, any thoughts on that?
Oh, it's just interesting that you say outsource it when you can, because that was my first instinct as well. Outsource it if I can. But what I've found with Kinsey is that her anxiety in being with an online teacher or in an online class, whether it's one-on-one or with other students, is so high that it actually increases her cognitive load. So it's better if I sit down and take the time and just try and figure out a way to reduce our cognitive load in other ways so that we can have that extra mental space to focus on this high cognitive load topic together. I think she gets stressed also because like online classes have a set amount of time. And so then she feels the pressure of that time limit as well.
So the thing that I think it's also really important to recognize is if you are going to be learning in that situation and you're wonderful, I know you're wonderful about building breaks in, recognize this is a subject with a high intrinsic load. Now, for example, some parents will then put that at the beginning of the day, or some homeschoolers will put that at the beginning of the day when everybody's freshest. What does that mean for the rest of the day? Well, it really depends on how much mental effort that takes, but you are going to want to build in a break. And my recommendation is the break doesn't include screen time, at least for my grandkids. That is the worst. Because kids can get they do. So I guess the point is I don't want to be anti-screen time, but my point is don't put anything that it also requires some mental effort and some figuring out. No matter how pleasurable that might be for your learners, it continues to drain their ability to kind of get back to the learning situation for the next subject. The other thing that you will see some people do is they will say, for example, they'll stagger the days that they work on a subject that has a high intrinsic load. And then what they'll do for the rest of the day, they'll do something that has fun projects that, like history and or science. So you might have math, do math, uh, and then have something that, or art, and then art or science or, some history that where there's some hands-on part. The other thing is that don't buy into a timeline for learning. So if you've got a math course, it works for you, it works for your kids, but if when the going through the whole lesson just is completely overwhelming, do half a lesson, right? So it takes you 2 years. That timeline is, we all buy into it, every single one of us, but so many kids don't actually thrive under that timeline.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because one of the things I was going to say was that at one of the very first talks I saw you give at the in-person SEA conference in West Virginia, you said, there's no timeline for learning. And that has stuck with me so much. One of the great things about homeschooling is that we're on our own schedule. I have
We lost Kat somehow.
no.
So the first conference, so Kat was talking about a timeline for learning. We'll get right back to you, Kat. And so what popped into my mind, you know how you buy those history timelines? I want you to think about what I'm talking about there. When I say there's no timeline for learning, I'm basically saying, you know how you go on this date in this year, this happened, and then on this date on this year, this happened. That's how we treat learning. So it's going to take 3 months to learn this, and it's going to take a month and a half to learn this. Really? You can figure that out. You have a crystal ball, and you can figure that out ahead of time for your iconic, idiosyncratic individual. And yeah. Okay, Kat.
Sorry, my toddler unplugged my camera from the back of my computer.
And now you muted yourself accidentally. Um,
Okay. Um, Speaking of cognitive load, there is a lot going on around me as we are having this conversation. Uh,
at the start of this, right before we went live, everyone, Kat said, I have to baby proof my house. My toddler's getting around more.
she is on her own timeline and has some delays, and so we were not expecting her to be as mobile as quickly, and it's just overnight from yesterday to today. Oh my goodness. But no, what I'm saying about no timeline for learning, we're really lucky homeschooling that we're able to take breaks when we need breaks. We're able to homeschool year round. I live in Florida. It's like a million degrees outside right now. So now is the time of year where we're inside doing more book work. And then in the winter, when it's, snowing and cold up north, we are outside doing nature study and doing more hands-on outdoor play and things like that. But with Kinsey, with breaks, you were talking about no screens, Blair. I really specifically try and have activities for breaks that have a limited amount of time without feeling like she has a time limit. So, like letting her get on a screen and setting a timer is going to cause stress because she's going to think about how much time is left on her timer the entire time, and she's not actually going to give herself a break. But if I give her crayons and a coloring page and say, why don't you color 2 pages and then we'll get back to this, that's something that has an ending. I can't tell her go build Legos for 20 minutes because she'll get into the build and then she'll be upset she has to stop and transition back. But sometimes I'll pick up like the little mini Lego kits that are only like 50 pieces in the little bags when I see them on clearance somewhere, and I'll keep them. And then when I need her to take a 30-minute break or something, I can give her this one little kit and be like, okay, build this. And then it has a natural ending, and that makes that transition back to academics easier for her.
Well, Sean has always lived, his primary residence has always been somewhere that doesn't get to a million degrees. So I always kicked Sean outside. I used to say, out, out, take the dogs out. And sometimes I'd go with him, and sometimes I wouldn't. So I have a saying which is I need to get we need to get sunlight in our eyeballs, and everybody knows that means I'm kicking everybody outside, including myself, a lot of the time. I always make sure every day to go meditate in the sun a little, but um
When I was staying at your house, dog sitting for you a few years back, gosh, it's been several years now, pre-COVID. Um, I took my laptop out and worked out in your backyard every day. If I lived where you lived, I would be outside every day.
yeah, California versus Florida, everyone. California's better. Okay. The other thing that I want to remind parents that really feels stressful, but actually turns out not to be very stressful and kind of fun, don't psych yourself into thinking something's going to be super hard. By the way, that adds to your cognitive load because it was challenging when you learned it in school. You can learn right along with your child, right along with your child. And so just and break it up. Take your time. Both of you learn together. I like to say, as long as you're a page width above them in case they need help. That's it. That's all you have to do. Um, yeah. So, but I guess my number one thing would be think about intrinsic load, your intrinsic load too. Like let that be eye-opening. Let yourself start checking in with yourself. And so that you can, am I getting overwhelmed? If in within the context of homeschooling, you start to feel a little overwhelmed, take a step back, take a deep breath, and try to figure out where the cognitive load is happening for you. If it's, it's interesting, parents do what Kinsey does. Will need to wash the dishes, need to fold the clothes, need to do homeschooling, need to pick up groceries for tonight's dinner. Okay. And they all are at the top of the list, right? Prioritize. Okay, I could make chili out of a can if I had to. Really, those clothes are still going to be there later. And so just think about it. And if you can't stop worrying about those things, as opposed to homeschooling, if they're like hanging over your head, have a day where everybody pitches in and helps with that. Real life school today. I mean, you have to unburden some of this load and then work on controlling some things. The other thing that you have to be very careful of as an adult with cognitive load, probably children too, um, recognize the things that are adding to your cognitive load that are out of your control. Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, you've got your circle of influence and your circle of concern. And your circle of concern is bigger than your circle of influence. And the more time you spend outside of your circle of influence, inside of your circle of concern, which means the more time you spend with mental effort on things you completely out of your control, the less effective you are because you don't have any control of those. When it comes to homeschooling, be careful if you're worried we're not moving at a fast enough pace. You're moving at the pace you're moving at. So it's out of your control that in a way it really is. As long as you are consistently working on learning, it is out of your control how fast your child learns. It is. And that is a big part of what I mean by there's no timeline for learning. Anything to add to that, Kat?
No, I was just thinking about some things that I see like in the C group all the time. People who are new to homeschooling and they're looking at curriculum for the first time and looking at curriculum that's like really scripted or really laid out for you can seem really overwhelming, especially ADHD parent. I take one look at some of these more scripted curriculum programs and all these moving pieces and I'm like, there's no way that I can implement this. This is too much for me. It's going to add too much to my cognitive load. Um, and you see that a lot, that people are like, well, I don't want anything that's too parent intensive because it's too much. I can't handle it. But then once you actually start using a program like that and you get into the routine of it, those programs actually reduce your cognitive load because you're not having to figure out the lesson plans. You're not having to find all of these supplemental resources and plan it all yourself. You're not having to figure out if you are teaching skills in a sequential manner that makes sense for them to build on each other so that you're not leaving big gaps or so your kid isn't getting to a higher level skill and not having the foundation that they need to be successful with it, which will increase their cognitive load if you're leaving those kinds of gaps, especially for something like math, where everything builds very sequentially. Um, and so I see parents who are coming in to see, and they're like, we started homeschooling this past year and we didn't use any curriculum because I didn't want anything too structured and I thought it would be too overwhelming. And trying to put this all together myself is taking too much time and I'm worried my kids aren't learning what they need to learn. And so they're coming in and they're finding curriculum, and what I see is people coming back and going, I wish I had done this sooner. We had a thread a couple weeks ago where somebody was like, what is something that you wish you had started sooner in your homeschool? And there are hundreds of comments on there, and so many of them are, I wish I had started using a structured curriculum sooner. I wish I had started outsourcing writing sooner. All of these things that, when you think about it, are actually things that are reducing the cognitive load for the parent so that homeschooling can be more successful. But they're the exact same things that I see people when they first start homeschooling that they don't want to do because those things feel like they're going to be overwhelming and add to the cognitive load.
Well, that is super interesting. The thing I was the most nervous about was grammar. We did not end up now that I understand how grammar's best learned, didn't actually choose something particularly effective. But I mean, my son is quite good on telling you he can diagram a sentence like nobody's business. He's particularly gifted at that. He can tell you what the various terms mean. He can tell you all those things. And then you think, goodness, there's now these AI grammar programs because as far as where the comma goes, I was nervous about it because I do love commas. Um, so I was kind of nervous about it, and but I did choose a scripted curriculum. Oh my goodness, made it completely took my cognitive load and concern off in that regard. So that's intrinsic load. I think, do you have anything else to add? Because let's move on to extraneous load, which, by the way, the easiest for you to control, a person to control. But
No,
anything
I
else
don't
on
have anything else to add there.
okay, extraneous load. This is poor instructional design, irrelevant information, things that are bugging you that don't have anything to do with the learning situation, things that distract you. This type of load should be minimized. It doesn't help with actual learning. It doesn't actually have anything to do with actual learning, and it can significantly impact learning. Now, think first about the extraneous load for you. Can I teach using this material? Before you dismiss, if you're kind of like, I'm not sure, check with your child. There are going to be some things that absolutely, so it's something that would be extraneous load. If I were to accidentally have picked up non-secular materials, that actually add to that's an extraneous load issue because I would kind of have to skip over those parts. So for me, that would be irrelevant information because I'm not going to be using this. I would find that so distracting. It would bug me every time I went to that curriculum. So that's what I'm saying. Now, not about secular versus non-secular. Of course, you might agree with me on that. But if there's something in the curriculum that you're just like, I can't get around this, that counts as extraneous load, right? Um, I need to ask it, do we need to say anything else about extraneous load? I mean, it's just like it's, you know, even if you're not an organized type, organize, clean up, do whatever, get rid of all of the things that are like sitting here. We kind of already addressed it, didn't we?
I think we did kind of already address it. Yeah. You are very organized. I am not organized at all. My ADHD chaos is
Kat,
kind of
you
everywhere.
put your mic down too low. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. My ADHD chaos is everywhere. And so, one of the easiest things I have done is we will spend just 5 minutes. I will set a timer in 5 minutes while Kinsey is doing whatever she needs to do to get herself ready and prepared to sit down and work on something. I will do a quick sweep of 5 minutes, even if that means take an empty box and scoop everything off the desk into the box and stick it under the desk until I have time to go through it later. There is 5 minutes of clean up the space before we get started.
I am a compulsive picker-upper, and I do mean compulsive about it. I'll be like, shoo.
I married someone who is like that.
Um, the only thing I'm not, I leave shoes everywhere. I've left shoes at houses that weren't mine before. I always leave shoes around, but everything else I'm like a really compulsive picker-upper, which is good because it really distracts my husband if there's any mess. He can't function like it. I never knew until I started like learning about cognitive load. I did not understand why he just would shut down when things are too messy or when he's got too many tasks happening all at once. Um, okay, let's talk about germane load. Again, this is the productive mental effort that goes into processing, constructing, and automating knowledge. And I think that this really is where it's going to feel like it's not particularly related. You already alluded to it or brought it up. This is the problem when people wait too long to start introducing instruction with their learners because your child hasn't built the neural pathways of for learning and they're not building schema, which are the structures your brain uses to store information. It it why don't you talk to people about the I think why don't you provide some insight into the problems for cognitive load that presents for young learners, Kat?
Well, I mean, cognitive load when it comes to young learners, it's just like anything else. You have to build up some academic stamina. And I know using the term academic stamina with young learners sounds, counterintuitive, but that's really what it is. It just looks very different with 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 year olds than it does with a 15 or 16-year-old. But it is academic stamina that needs to be built up. And there is certain amount of neuroplasticity that is in the human brain before the age of 5 or 6 that is never there again. And so while can kids learn anything later on? Yes. Is it going to be require a higher cognitive load and more intentional mental effort for them to learn it later on? Yes. Um, there are some things when they're young that are just going to be easier and it's going to become something that they no longer have to think about, that is just going to be basically muscle memory for them. I see a lot about delayed academics, and there are absolutely some things that I see in older preschool and kindergarten curriculum, not stuff that is currently on the market, but I'm a second generation homeschooler. I've seen some of the older stuff, both for public schools and homeschooling, that is absolutely not developmentally appropriate. But the things that are available now, the majority of them are written very intentionally to be developmentally appropriate. And so it is my opinion that by using those, you reduce the parents' cognitive load because they don't have to be as stressed about, is my kid learning what they should be learning? But you're also going to reduce the long-term cognitive load of your child because you are going to build the academic stamina in a really developmentally appropriate way.
Well said. You made the case for Jermaine Load really well. Really well. And I think, is that a wrap? I think that, do
I
you have
think,
anything?
yeah, yeah, when we talk about germane load, it's really easy to talk about young kids and how to build up that academic stamina. But something that we really need to consider, especially in the secular homeschool community where we have a large number of parents who are homeschooling because their child is neurodivergent and the in-person schools cannot meet the child's needs. And so they're homeschooling to be able to accommodate and give their child the best education they can. When you're looking at curriculum for neurodivergent learners, there are a lot of things that come more easily to neurotypical kids. Um, and because of that, will increase the germane load for some neurodivergent kids. A lot of kids with ADHD will never be able to fully memorize math facts, like basic multiplication and division facts where they're memorized and quick. And so if that's the case for your learner, um, rather than, I see some people who they just won't move on until their kid memorizes this. For some kids, that's simply never going to happen. So as you're looking at math curriculum, that's something that you need to take into consideration of, you know, how much, is this an online program that is going to require my child to be able to solve these problems as if they have these memorized? Are there accommodations that I can, maybe tape a multiplication chart to the back cover of my kids' math textbook so that if they get stuck, they have somewhere they can easily look that is always with their math book. Just these little things that um, a lot of people don't think about because they're so in this public school mindset of, oh, well, they memorize, you know, addition and subtraction by third grade, and they memorize multiplication and division by fifth grade, and then middle school and high school curriculum is written to assume that these children have this stuff in automatic
No, it's
relay, and they
it's
just
it's
don't.
your grades are off. Any child that did not have their multiplication memorized by the end of third grade is supposed to work on it over the summer in California. They're supposed to start fourth grade with the multiplication tables memorized. Um, it's interesting. I had not, I wonder what they're doing with children who have ADHD around that.
They're making the children feel like they're incompetent and failing. I
So,
mean, let's be honest, they are moving on as if the child knows it because they have to teach to where the majority is.
mhm.
And then the child is internalizing these, that these things as deficits that are character flaws. That's what happens with a lot of ADHD kids. When it comes to education, they're not able to keep up in a neurotypical manner. They're not able to master some skill. The rest of the class has moved on, and they internalize it as a character flaw and a personal failure rather than this is something that isn't in my wheelhouse, and I'm going to accommodate a way to move on because I could still be a super successful scientist with heavy math use, even if I can't remember what 8 times 8 is. Because you know what? There's a ton of other ways to know what 8 times 8 is when you need it.
um, so an interesting, we're talking schema, cognitive load. This is going to be a little OT, but um, gifted kids. Gifted kids will, in some ways, just they have an easier time with setting up those schema. It's just their brain just is naturally does that more effectively with more ease. Where I see, an interesting phenomenon that happens, and I'm talking about science here because this is really the area that I've spent have the most experience with working with gifted learners, is that there's holes. You have these learners who they move so fast through the material, and so it actually kind of I've come to think that it adds to the cognitive load of gifted learners to be told to really be asked to focus for the extended period of time on the entire body because it feels like it moves really slow for them. But I cannot tell you how many times I've had because parents, their child, they want to share with me the learning that their gifted learner has done in an area of science, but they can't make the connections away from those very specific topics that the kids were highly interested in. Do you have any input about how to address that, Kat?
Um, there again, when kids are young, part of building up that academic stamina in a developmentally appropriate way is to to get your kids used to kind of slowing down by going deeper instead of faster. I have kids who have high academic needs, so I let them go faster and explore their interest in their free time. When it came to our structured academics, we would go deeper instead of faster. Um,
I mean, you
if
you have to be careful with gifted kids. If they view something as too easy, they check out.
Yeah, but you can go deeper into a topic and do more challenging work without moving along to the next level faster.
Right, right. I just wanted to see your my sister-in-law she's retired now, but who worked in an award-winning fourth grade school, and she was a fourth grade teacher. She had a gifted and talented gate class, is what it's a California thing. Um, and that's what she told me. She said, you go for breadth. You go for breadth and you make it meaty and meaningful.
Hmm.
Because yeah, yeah. And I think you also start making connections. You have a child who's a learner who's gifted in math, begin looking for science programs where math shows up or that are easy to incorporate math into. Yeah,
Well, and you can start talking about, the history of mathematics and how the history of mathematics came out of various parts of the world and different cultures, and there's so much information available now and more coming out all the time where it's not just this Eurocentric study of academic history. When you start looking at mathematics and engineering and inventors, and like there's so many things that can come off of a kid who's gifted in math, different directions you can go in. The other thing that I found raising kids with high academic needs is there can be a lot of really great Socratic discussions that happen without necessarily that keeps them interested and it keeps them engaged without needing to rush through to the next level of whatever subject you're working with.
that's that creating a culture of thinking it really is benefits cognitive load. It builds it it, it so first of all, something we haven't said yet, adults have a higher cognitive load, can handle more than kids just because they've built up stamina around that. Yeah, Sean was a very early reader, loved writing, loved reading, and he we decided in, I think it was fourth grade, we introduced the Cyrillic alphabet. Not all alphabets are the same. That is how I introduced some breadth. I'm like, we're moving so fast. I don't want to lose. I want to make sure that he takes the time to build these schema. And so the Cyrillic alphabet might seem like a red herring introduced in there, but it was actually, I wanted to focus on the way letters make words and how words have meaning. And so we decided to bring in and it was really fun. It was really fun. And then many years later, one of his brothers met and married someone who's Ukrainian, and so it was really I could read all the signs. At the end of the day, was better at reading in Cyrillic than Sean. And that'll happen. My cognitive load was less around that, or I was able to handle more, whatever. Okay, everyone. I think that is it for the day. Lyra has said, Mom, it's time to get off. Much love, everyone.
Bye.
Oh, and we're going to be doing this as a series because Blair's cognitive load is so high right now with work. Kat said, let's get together and just record some conversations. And so I can't remember. What's our topic for next week, Kat?
Our topic for next week, I can tell you, is using online forums effectively to support your homeschool journey.
Okay, you see how organized she is?
It's your influence. Your influence has reduced my cognitive load.